I woke up to an unsettling absence. The stack of firewood I'd split last weekend, neatly piled against the fence, was gone. At first, I thought maybe raccoons or some desperate neighbor had helped themselves. But no, this was deliberate. The wood was stacked too neatly to be a crime of opportunity. Someone had stolen it. I stormed back inside, my blood heating with irritation. That was my winter supply, cut by my own hands. And in this town, where the HOA ruled with an iron fist wrapped in pastel-colored suburban bliss, I had a pretty good idea of who was behind it. Marsha Whitaker, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood, HOA president, and all-around menace. The woman ran our community like a fiefdom, micromanaging everything from mailbox heights to the color of porch cushions. A woman who had once fined my neighbor $200 for leaving his trash bins out 30 minutes too long. If anyone had the audacity to steal firewood and claim it was for the good of the community, it was her. I didn't have proof yet. But I had something better: security cameras. I sat down at my desk pulling up the footage, and sure enough, there she was, 5:47 a.m. Marsha, wrapped in her ridiculous designer puffer jacket, marching into my yard like she owned the place. Behind her, 2 HOA board members, her usual yes men, scurried along, grabbing my firewood like obedient worker ants. They stacked it neatly in a golf cart before rolling away, smug as ever. I pressed play again, rewinding to catch the audio. This will look so much better in the common area than that disgusting pile he had. I clenched my jaw. The audacity. She didn't even try to justify it with something reasonable like a firewood shortage or an emergency. No, Marsha had simply decided that my woodpile didn't meet her aesthetic standards. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice dripping with artificial politeness. "Hello, this is Marsha. You stole my firewood?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. There was a pause, just a beat too long before she spoke. "Oh, is this Daniel? Lovely to hear from you. And stolen is such a harsh word. I relocated it to the community center for our neighborhood bonfire tonight. It's for everyone's enjoyment." "You had no right—" "Well, actually," she interrupted, her tone clipped, "as per HOA Regulation 14B, all external storage must maintain aesthetic integrity. Your pile was an eyesore. I simply corrected the issue for the betterment of the neighborhood. You should be thanking me." I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "I want it back." A condescending laugh. "Oh, don't be so selfish, Daniel. We're fostering community spirit. Come by tonight. You might just enjoy yourself." And then she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my pulse hammering, in my ears. She was untouchable. At least she thought she was. Fine. She wanted a bonfire? I'd give her one. I spent the rest of the morning carefully crafting my revenge. I retrieved a few of the older logs I had set aside, ones that had hollowed out over time. Then, with a bit of bait and patience, I filled them with fire ants, hundreds of them. They swarmed inside the crevices, burrowing into the wood, their tiny bodies moving with frenetic energy. I sealed the logs carefully, making sure they looked identical to the others. By the time I was done, my pulse had settled into a steady rhythm of satisfaction. Now all I had to do was wait. That evening, I arrived at the community bonfire. The event was in full swing. Families gathered around, laughing and roasting marshmallows. The flames flickered high, casting warm, deceptive light over a crowd oblivious to the storm about to break. And then I saw her. Marsha, standing near the fire, basking in the glow like a queen surveying her kingdom. She waved to residents like a politician, soaking up the attention. "Isn't this lovely?" she cooed. "A perfect evening, thanks to our wonderful HOA." I spotted my firewood in the pile beside the pit, and among them, the cursed logs. Then came the moment of fate. Marsha bent down, selecting a log. One of mine. With a self-satisfied smile, she lifted it and tossed it into the flames. I held my breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The fire crackled, licking the edges of the wood. But then, chaos. The heat drove the fire ants out in a frenzy. They poured from the log in a wave of panic, crawling over anything in their path. Within seconds, they were everywhere, skittering across the ground, climbing up unsuspecting legs. Screams erupted. People jumped back, slapping at their clothes. Someone knocked over a drink stand in the panic, sending cups flying. Children cried. Adults swore. And then, Marsha. She shrieked, stumbling backward as ants swarmed up her ridiculous fur-lined boots. She flailed wildly, slapping at her legs, trying to shake them off. Her designer coat did nothing to shield her. Oh my God, what is happening? I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Someone doused the flames with a bucket of water, sending up a hiss of steam. But the damage was done. The perfect, picturesque evening had turned into a nightmare. Marsha stood frozen, her face contorted in horror as the realization dawned. Her perfect event, her grand spectacle of power, ruined. And just like that, the tide began to turn. Because now people weren't just looking at Marsha as their leader. They were looking at her as the woman who had stolen private property and, in doing so, unleashed hell on the neighborhood. The murmurs started small. Wait, where did this wood come from? Didn't Daniel say it was his? She stole it? Marsha's eyes darted wildly. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the moment had shifted. The people who once feared her were now questioning her. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Marsha stood there panting, her face locked in an expression of frozen horror. The bonfire event, the pinnacle of her perfect little community vision, had turned into a full-scale panic. Families stomped, their feet shaking out their clothes, while others hurried off with their kids, swearing under their breath. The murmurs of discontent around her grew louder, more pointed. Did she really steal that firewood? She did. I heard Daniel say it was his. She used HOA funds for this, didn't she? It was subtle, but I caught it. That flicker of panic behind her icy blue eyes. A crack in her mask. Marsha Whitaker had built her entire rule on intimidation and control. But now, the foundation was shifting under her. She snapped into damage control mode. Everyone, please remain calm. She smoothed down her pristine jacket, though her hands still twitched from residual adrenaline. It was just an unfortunate accident. A freak occurrence. The important thing is that no one is hurt. She forced a laugh, her tone brittle. Now, let's not let one little setback ruin the spirit of community. You stole from me, I said loudly enough that the surrounding crowd quieted. Marsha turned toward me, her smile fixed, but her eyes burned with warning. Daniel, she said, her voice saccharine. I already explained. You stole from me, I repeated, stepping closer, letting the words hang in the cold night air. And now look at this mess. A few people murmured their agreement. Others looked at her, waiting for an explanation. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the conversation. Her lips thinned. That's enough. If you have a complaint, you're welcome to file a formal grievance with the HOA board. I scoffed. Right. The same board you personally control? She took a sharp breath, clearly trying to reel in her temper. This is neither the time nor the place. But it was the place to steal from a homeowner? I shot back. That landed. The whispers swelled again. Marsha's grip on the situation was slipping, and she knew it. Her chin lifted. This event is over, she announced, snapping her fingers at her lackeys. Rick and Deborah, the two most loyal members of her little HOA regime. Clean this up. They hesitated. That was the first real sign of trouble. Marsha was used to instant obedience, but tonight, after the fire ant disaster, after the public humiliation, her influence wasn't landing the way it used to. I caught Deborah casting a glance toward the crowd, hesitant, before finally stepping forward to gather discarded chairs. Rick followed, though he didn't look thrilled about it. The queen still had some power, for now. But she had overplayed her hand, and I wasn't going to let her recover. The next morning, I woke to another slap in the face, a violation notice taped to my door. Notice of immediate HOA infraction. Violation, disrupting community events. Fine, 500. I let out a short, humorless laugh. The woman was unbelievable. I crumpled the paper in my fist. That was the moment I knew this was war. Marsha doubled down. Over. The next week, the infractions piled up. Petty, absurd, one after another, each more ridiculous than the last. Failure to maintain uniform holiday decorations. Fine. $250. My porch had a single wreath. Apparently, it clashed with the approved theme. Excessive noise after hours. Fine, $350. I had been listening to a podcast inside my house. Alone. With the windows closed. Unapproved lawn ornament. Fine, $175. My garden gnome had apparently been deemed unsightly. Every morning I'd wake up to another fine, another notice, another passive-aggressive attempt to grind me down, and it wasn't just me. Others started getting fines too. A neighbor got written up for having a bird feeder that attracted too many sparrows. Another was fined for using an unapproved shade of white for their porch railing, despite having painted it years ago with Marsha's own approval. She was cracking down, tightening her grip, suffocating the neighborhood with her desperate need to reestablish control. But something had changed. People weren't just taking it anymore. The murmurs from the bonfire had grown into something else, doubt and resistance. One evening, I was in my garage looking over my latest fine, this one for failure to properly edge lawn borders, when I heard a knock. It was Rick, one of Marsha's most loyal HOA board members. He looked around nervously before stepping inside, lowering his voice. "I need to talk to you." I crossed my arms. "Oh? About what?" He hesitated. "Look, I've been on the board for 5 years. I know how Marsha works, and I think you might be onto something." I raised an eyebrow. "Might be?" Rick swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder before lowering his voice further. "I know for a fact that she's been breaking HOA rules herself. She has violations, big ones that could get her removed if they ever came to light." That got my attention. "What kind of violations?" Rick hesitated. "I can't say here, but let's just say if you push hard enough, you'll find something she's been covering up for years." The pieces started clicking into place. Marsha had built her rule on absolute control, wielding the HOA bylaws like a weapon. But what if she'd been violating them herself? What if she had skeletons in her own backyard, ones that, if exposed, could bring everything crashing down? I leaned in, lowering my voice to match his. "How do I find it?" Rick exhaled, looking genuinely torn. "You didn't hear this from me," he said finally, "but check the HOA's discretionary budget records. Specifically, anything involving beautification projects." And just like that, I had my first real lead. The bonfire disaster had been a warning shot. But now I had something much bigger, and Marsha had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop, fingers drumming against the wood as I weighed my next move, the HOA's discretionary budget. Rick's tip had been vague, but it was enough. If Marsha had been misusing funds, the records would show it. There was just one problem. HOA financials weren't exactly public knowledge. I'd need access, and I knew exactly where to get it. The next morning, I paid a visit to the HOA office, a small, nondescript building attached to the community center. It was mostly for show. Marsha ran everything from her house, but she kept this place as a front of legitimacy. Inside, Deborah sat at the reception desk, typing away on her computer. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting into mild surprise. "Daniel," she said cautiously. "Morning." I kept my tone friendly, casual. "Listen, I need to take a look at the HOA's budget records." Deborah frowned. "That's not really something homeowners can access without approval." I leaned against the counter. "Right, but Marsha can access them whenever she wants, right?" Her frown deepened. I pressed on. "I mean, technically, isn't the HOA supposed to be transparent? Homeowners pay dues. We should be able to see where our money goes." She hesitated. "Good." Deborah wasn't like Marsha. She was loyal but not blind. "Marsha wouldn't like it," she murmured. "That's kind of the point." She exhaled sharply, glancing around before finally pulling up a file on her screen. "You didn't get this from me," she muttered, clicking a few times before turning the monitor slightly. I leaned in, scanning the list of expenses. Most were standard: landscaping, maintenance, security patrols. But then I saw it. Community beautification project. $47,000. That alone wasn't damning. But then I saw the breakdown: $2,500, contracting $9,800, materials $6,200, administrative fees $18,500, miscellaneous. That last one made my pulse spike. I pointed at it. "What the hell is miscellaneous?" Deborah swallowed. "That's Marsha's personal category. She moves money there when she doesn't." "Want to explain something?" I stared at her. "And no one questions it?" She shook her head. "No one's ever dared. Until now." I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the screen. Deborah paled. "Daniel, I'm not saying anything yet," I assured her. "But tell me something. Does Marsha still live in that house on Briarwood?" She blinked. "Yes. Why?" I slipped my phone into my pocket. "Just curious." That evening, I parked my truck a few houses down from Marsha's property. I wasn't trespassing, just observing. Her house was pristine, a 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping, the kind of house that screamed, "I'm better than you." But I wasn't interested in the hydrangeas or the overpriced seasonal wreath on her door. I was interested in the backyard. Because if Marsha had been using HOA funds for something personal, there would be proof. I walked along the sidewalk, keeping a casual pace. Then, just as I passed the back fence, I saw it. A brand new patio, massive stonework, built-in grill, custom fire pit, a beautification project funded by HOA money. Bingo. I snapped a few pictures, my pulse thrumming. This wasn't just an abuse of power. This was embezzlement. And once the neighborhood found out, Marsha was done. But I underestimated her, because by the time I got home, she was already waiting. A white Lexus idled in my driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark. I stepped out of my truck, and the driver's side door swung open. Marsha emerged. She was still in her usual power outfit, impeccable blazer, pearl necklace, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't playing politician anymore. She was playing enforcer. I crossed my arms. To what do I owe the pleasure? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel," she said smoothly, "I heard you were snooping around." I leaned against my truck. "Snooping? No, just taking an interest in how our HOA funds are spent." Her smile tightened. "I hope you're not planning to spread misinformation." "Nothing misinformation about it. I've got pictures, records." I shrugged. "Seems like you've been using HOA funds for personal projects." Her eyes darkened. "Be very careful, Daniel," I chuckled. "Or what? You'll find me again? Hit me with another bogus violation?" She took a step closer. "You don't understand what you're getting into." I held her gaze. "No, you don't understand. The second I show these records to the neighborhood, you're done." She exhaled through her nose. "You think a few receipts are enough to bring me down?" I frowned. And then she smiled. A slow, knowing smile. "Funny thing about HOAs," she mused. "They can make life very, very difficult. You see, I know people, lawyers, zoning officials. Do you have any idea how easy it would be to have your house deemed non-compliant?" My stomach turned. Marsha leaned in. "One call, and you could be looking at thousands in mandatory repairs. Your property taxes could go up. I could even have a lien placed on your home." I clenched my jaw. She tapped a manicured finger against my chest. "You think you can outmaneuver me? I am the HOA. I make the rules." Then she patted my shoulder, turning back toward her car. "Sleep well, Daniel," she called over her shoulder. "It might be the last peaceful night you have." I watched her drive off, my blood boiling. This wasn't just a fight over fines anymore. She was threatening my home, and I'd just been handed the perfect reason to end her, because while she was busy playing queen, she'd forgotten one simple fact: HOA bylaws applied to everyone, including her, and buried deep in those bylaws was a rule she'd never see coming. I spent the next 48 hours dissecting the HOA rulebook, page by page, clause by clause. Marsha had built her empire on technicalities, on bending and twisting regulations until no one could tell where the rules ended and her personal vendettas began. But I wasn't looking for loopholes. I was looking for something ironclad, a rule that would cut through her armor like a blade, and then, buried in Section 8, under Conflict of Interest and HOA Board Conduct, I found it. A single clause. Any HOA board member found to have misappropriated community funds for personal gain will be immediately removed from their position, effective upon majority vote of the homeowners. I stared at the words, my pulse picking up speed. Immediate removal. No appeals. No legal wrangling. Just one vote. She had written her own death sentence, and I was about to deliver it. The HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening. Normally, these meetings were dull, sparsely attended, a formality that allowed Marsha to rubber stamp whatever new rule she wanted to impose. Not this time. By the time I arrived at the community center, the place was packed. Word had spread. Homeowners who had never cared about HOA politics now filled the seats, murmuring amongst themselves. Marsha sat at the head of the long conference table, wearing her signature smug expression. To her right sat Rick and Deborah, stiff and uncomfortable. The rest of the board members were scattered, some already whispering among themselves. I stepped forward. Before we begin, I said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, I have something to present to the homeowners. Marsha's eyes flickered with annoyance, but she gave a tight smile. Daniel, this is an official meeting. If you have concerns, you can... I cut her off by setting down a stack of printed documents. Financial records, I said, showing that nearly $18,000 of our HOA fees were listed as miscellaneous under the Community Beautification Project. The room stirred. I kept going, and I went to look at what exactly that money was spent on. I pulled out my phone, displaying the photos of Marsha's newly built stone patio, grill, and custom fire pit. I turned the screen toward the crowd. This, in Marsha Whitaker's backyard. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Marsha's expression didn't change. That's a very serious accusation, she said smoothly, and entirely unfounded. The board approved those funds for... No, we didn't. Everyone turned. Rick. He looked pale, but his voice was steady. You moved that money yourself, Marsha. The board never approved it. Marsha's jaw twitched. Rick, let's not spread misinformation. Deborah cleared her throat. I work with the HOA finances, she said, standing up. Daniel is right. That money was hidden under miscellaneous expenses, and Marsha signed off on all of it personally. Another wave of murmurs. People were looking at one another, nodding, their expressions shifting from curiosity to anger. Marsha sat up. Straighter, but I could see it now, the flicker of nerves behind her eyes. Still, she held her ground. This is a misinterpretation of funds, she said tightly. I have always acted in the best interest of this community, and You stole from us. The words came from the back of the room. A man in his 60s, arms crossed. Others nodded in agreement. Shouldn't that mean she's removed? From the board? Another voice chimed in. Marsha shook her head. That's not how this works. Actually, I said, flipping to the page I had bookmarked. It is. I read aloud. Any HOA board member found to have misappropriated community funds for personal gain will be immediately removed from their position, effective upon majority vote of the homeowners. Silence. Marsha's face went white. For the first time, she had no retort, no fake rule to hide behind, just the truth. I turned to the room. Let's vote. A rustling of movement. People glanced at one another, then at Marsha, who sat frozen in place. Then, one by one, hands went up. First, a few, then a dozen, then the entire damn room, every single hand. Marsha looked around wildly, her breathing uneven. You can't, her voice cracked. You can't do this. This is my... You're done, Marsha, Rick said. And just like that, it was over. Security escorted her out of the community center. No one stopped her. No one defended her. She sputtered. She threatened. She swore this wasn't over. But it was. She had ruled through fear, but fear only worked when people believed in your power. And Marsha had just been exposed for what she truly was, a fraud, and without her throne. She was nothing. The aftermath was swift. The board overturned every fine she had issued in the past 6 months. All of her petty rules gone. The ridiculous restrictions, the power plays, the endless threats, dismantled. For the first time in years, the neighborhood belonged to the people who actually lived in it. And Marsha? She packed up and left within the month. Rumor had it she moved to another HOA-controlled community. But this time, she wasn't in charge. I like to imagine her sitting in her new house, seething every time she saw someone's unapproved garden gnome or non-uniform holiday lights. Poetic justice. A few weeks later, I sat in my backyard, stretching, my legs in front of my newly restocked firewood pile. The flames flickered, warm and steady, peaceful, the way it should be. I reached for a log, grinning as I threw it onto the fire. No fire ants this time. I leaned back, letting the heat soak into my skin. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood was quiet, and damn, did it feel good.